In this episode, we speak with Chris Walters, CEO of Finastra, a financial services software provider across lending, payments, treasury, and capital markets, and digital and retail banking. Finastra serves roughly 7,000 plus customers worldwide, including about 80% of the world's top 50 banks, and supports large-scale financial workflows, helping move about $7 trillion in transactions per day, and supporting syndicated lending activity measured in the trillions. The company's portfolio spans core platforms that financial institutions rely on to run lending operations, process payments, and modernize banking services through cloud and open technology. Chris became CEO in January 2025 after serving as CEO of Pluralsight and CEO of Avantax. Earlier, he held senior operating roles including COO of Bloomberg's Industry Verticals Group and COO of the Weather Company. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the Executive Chairman of Market Insight Media and Managing Partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Key Executives, a podcast for driven executives and business operators. Our podcast covers all topics related to effective business leadership, from strategy and culture to products and services to sales and marketing and everything in between. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring executives.
Chris, thank you so much for taking the time. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
There's a lot happening in the software space, both in the public markets as well as in the private markets. And we'll talk about what's happening macro picture. But first, for the benefit of our audience, we'd love to hear about Finastra and all the areas that it's involved in, products and services and the financial institutions it serves.
Sure. So Finastra is a leading provider of mission-critical software to banks. And I'd describe three primary categories that we participate in. We offer core banking solutions, primarily in EMEA to larger enterprises, and we do have some core banking solutions for smaller banks in the US market. And then our two other major business units are our payments business unit, which offers a payments hub, one of the world's leading payment hubs. A number of the largest banks in the world use it all over the globe. And then we have our largest business unit is our lending business. And we have a number of industry-leading products. One, an amazing product called Loan IQ, which is the leading servicing platform for complex lending. A huge portion of the syndicated debt market is serviced on Loan IQ. We also have a great product called Laser Pro, which is primarily in the US and serves thousands of banks. It's a loan documentation solution, so all forms of lending. The assurance that we provide is if you use that product, our customers are regulatorily compliant at a federal, state, and local level. And then finally, we have a wonderful trade product where trade finance is a large part of the offering for many banks, particularly global banks. So we have a great product there. So those are the highlights. We do have a few more, but those are the biggest areas of our business.
It's a broad portfolio, and I think there's a history to how it came together. If you would, could you tell us a little bit about the history of the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So the business has been around for quite some time, many decades, actually. And like many of the largest financial software businesses, it was put together through a combination of great innovation and a number of acquisitions. And I'd say the end of that run of acquisitions was more than a half decade ago, where D&H, names that people would remember, D&H and Misys came together. Both kind of wonderful businesses in the financial software market. And they had a broad collection of products, even broader than what I described. Even had business process outsourcing business in Canada, supporting a student lending market, an exchange. We also had check printing, a wide variety of businesses, and we still have some of these in the portfolio. But one of the things that we've been doing since I arrived is actually narrowing our focus, where what we see is there's a number of very large providers of financial software that have these incredibly broad portfolios, but ultimately your customer's satisfaction is often governed by the weakest product that you bring them. And so if you're not investing aggressively enough across the portfolio, then it may be best for some of your products to be independent or in somebody else's hands. And so we have been narrowing the focus from the point where it was broadest when D&H and Misys came together.
Mm-hmm. You came on board, as you referenced, somewhat recently, about 1.5 years ago. When you were considering this opportunity, what appealed to you most about it?
A number of things. First, it's a wonderful market, right? So when you're serving banks globally, and we serve north of 7,000 of them, these are large institutions that play a critical role in the economy and for individuals and businesses. And so the role of the business, I thought, was pretty exciting. Second, the quality of the products and services, and honestly, the business performance was quite strong. And so it's nice to step into something where there's a very, very solid foundation. Interestingly, there's a bit of a disconnect in the market where I could see, before deciding to join, I could see the financial and operating performance of the business. And it was actually stronger than the market perception, right? And so obviously, no CEO would want to step in and say there's nothing that can be done to improve it. There's actually a bunch of improvement opportunities aligned to some of my prior experiences. But if one of the things is also just changing perception, right, you have an even stronger starting point than some people might expect. And so then, as I said, there were a whole bunch of opportunities to realize or deliver more value for customers that I saw, and a fair bit of align to things that I'd done in prior experiences. And so I was really excited to join. We've got a great team, great products, and great customers. And so it's been really fun over the last year and a half to be working with them.
You mentioned prior experiences. You have a good track record working with various organizations. You spent some time with McKinsey as well. Maybe tell us a little bit about those prior experiences and, some of the interesting things. You've worked with some interesting companies.
Yeah. And so I love learning, right? So I'm a voracious learner, and I like working on interesting problems or opportunities with great teams and great customers. And so I started after business school, my career as a consultant. I worked at McKinsey, as you said. I stuck around at McKinsey through being a partner. And over a 7-year period, I probably worked across 6 or 8 different industries. I touched technology, both services, hardware, software, data and information businesses, media businesses. And I also served investors, right? So I got exposed to the financial services industry, both investors as well as players in wealth or insurance. And so that was a really broad collection of businesses. And I spent a lot of time working with them on how to grow their businesses or optimize their performance. When I left McKinsey, I never would have expected that I would have touched all the different sectors that I touched when I was at McKinsey. And my experiences have gone a little bit different than many, which some pick one industry segment and they focus on that extensively. It ends up that I've led as a COO or a CEO, a handful of businesses, and they've touched virtually every one of the sectors that I worked in when I was at McKinsey. So I've led a public company that was both a software business and a wealth management business, both B2B and B2C software in the tax space. I've led a data and information business. I had a great experience at Bloomberg where led a bunch of their innovation efforts, as well as some of the corp dev work. So we were buying businesses to accelerate growth and then launching businesses almost like internal venture capital. We did some pretty exciting things there to launch some businesses that served a number of sectors. A really fun one was, in the times that we're in now, we understand how important the government is. And one of the hypotheses that we had at Bloomberg was that the government was going to have an even more pronounced impact on the financial markets than ever. And the US federal government, the biggest government in terms of spending and influence worldwide. So we launched a service that was tracking every bit of legislation, regulation, and government spending. US federal government. All that data flowed back to the terminal so investors could make better decisions. But there was also a whole bunch of other markets for it, which included lobbyists and trade associations and the government itself. And so that went from a very small business to a meaningful business in a very short period of time. So a lot of wonderful experiences, both at private and public companies. I would say 75% of it is around growth acceleration and delivering more value to customers faster or to new customer segments. And some portion of it has been operational kind of transformation or turnarounds.
Yeah, the weather company, that's also an interesting place just to think about just the number of eyeballs that are looking at, a digital property or digital information from the weather company. What did you focus on while you were there?
So there I was the COO, and most people know the most recognized business in that portfolio, which was actually the Weather Channel, was the most well-distributed cable network in the country. But we had 4 different areas of the business. So we had the television network. We also had some of the most successful consumer digital businesses. And so both weather.com at that point was a top 25 website, and we had a top 10 global app, right? So we had the Weather Channel app, which most people were using to consume weather information. We had a really meaningful data syndication business where we were pushing data to virtually all the digital platforms that were sharing it with their customers. Think of Google and Apple and others. And the volume of data was truly extraordinary. And then we had a whole collection of B2B information and software businesses serving media outlets, airlines, energy traders, insurance companies. And so it was a wonderful portfolio. And most people, when I went from Bloomberg to Weather, they would have said those seem like very, very different businesses. It ends up at the core of both was content, data, and technology. And then it was just the paths to monetize that and engage B2B and B2C users was different. But actually, there was way more similarity between the businesses than most expected. It was incredibly fun, though. It was a point where mobile was taking off, and we were probably at the forefront of delivering content and experiences to huge numbers of consumers. I think we had more than 100 million consumers that were using the app.
Hopping back to Finastra, what's on top of everyone's mind right now is AI and how it's affecting the software industry. I'm sure this is an area that Finastra was investing in early and integrating it into its operations as well as into its products. Maybe if you could share a little bit about how Finastra has stayed ahead of the AI trend.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating time. So the questions that I get these days fall into kind of two categories. One is, how is your business positioned in this world where AI is kind of disrupting apparently everything? And then secondarily, exactly what you described, which is, how are you applying it to your business or your business operations or your products? I will touch on the first one because it's so pervasive in people's minds, which is, how does our business stack up versus other software businesses in a time where there's a concern of a lot of disruption? And the way we think about it is, software businesses are on a spectrum. Some are highly at risk and some are low risk and potentially dramatically more opportunity. And a few of the characteristics that we look at that we think are most important in determining where your software business sits on that spectrum: how mission critical are you? If you're mission critical, the willingness to test something that is very rapidly developed and somewhat speculative, lower. And so how mission critical, how integrated are you? Right? So the more complex and extensive the integration, the lower the risk. What's your business model? So is your business model dependent upon the number of seats or these enterprise agreements linked to usage or assets? Obviously, in a world where efficiency is going to improve all the time, if you're in a seat-based model with short contract durations, that's actually a difficult thing. Outcomes, are they deterministic or probabilistic? LLMs are great if it's probabilistic. If it's deterministic, not so, because the way they're constructed, you're not going to get perfect outcomes all the time. And do they have to be auditable, and do regulators care? What ends up on all the criteria that I described, we sit at one far end of the spectrum. And so we feel very privileged in this disruptive time where our business is on an incredibly solid foundation. And so AI represents dramatically more opportunity than it does risk. But there's lots of confusion in the market broadly about software businesses and where they sit. If I flip to kind of where the opportunity within the business, the way we think about it is engineering productivity, right? So this is within our operations. Because we're a software business, the number one area we focused: how can we use AI to deliver more value to customers faster? And we've deployed a variety of tools and measurement techniques and are ultimately seeing some real productivity gains from our engineering organization, which is actually our largest investment of any area of the company. We're a software company. The second thing we're doing is looking at all of our non-engineering operations, and we do that top down and bottom up. And when I say top down, the sole goal here is to take the things off of our team's desks that are the things that they least like doing. What's most repetitive? We want people to get the most joy out of the work they do and deliver the most value to customers. And so if you can identify large pools of people or high value kind of team members where portions of their work is highly repetitive in nature, you can actually build solutions or leverage third-party solutions to drive some productivity gains. And we're seeing that in QA and opportunities in sales and even HR, right, where you can do that. And then bottom up, we're putting tools in people's hands right across the organization to experiment themselves and figure out ways that they can drive productivity gains and simplify kind of what they do in their work every day. And so that's the operational side. Then it's in our products, right? In our products, we think about a few levels of what can be offered. First is, how do you actually help your users use the product with less friction and a more rapid time to understand the full capabilities of it? And so that's through things like chatbots, which we've deployed some and will, for all of our key products, have chatbots that are really capable in the hands of users that will improve their experience. That's kind of level one. Level two for us is we have these incredibly powerful products that often a user may know just a portion of the functionality in it. But 5 times a week, they may need to do something that's well beyond the functionality that they use most. A great example from my past that links to this is when I was at Bloomberg, most users use less than 10 functions a week. However, there are 30,000 functions on the terminal.
Mm-hmm.
For us, something sophisticated like Loan IQ that has functionality to manage all of the most complex lending situations in the world, there's a massive amount of functionality, thousands and thousands of things that you can do, but an average user uses less. So how can we actually bring natural language commands into it? And that would be using AI, right? How do we make it very easy for somebody who isn't trained and hasn't mastered every capability within the offering to use it and get the full power of the offering? And then the third level for us, and this is going to require the most collaboration with customers, is we're sitting at the center of the operations of these banks. And every bank that we talk to is looking to drive operational efficiency within their organizations. Well, we're in a unique place where a lot of the critical data and the functionality is actually within our software. Anything that we're trying to drive operational efficiency, much of it needs to connect to the software. And so if we can prioritize what are the things that operators in a payments department do that are most repetitive and least gentlemen love to take off their desk. And so one example of that, just to bring it to life, is that the first thing that we're launching in that third category is something called Operator Assist, where one of the tasks that people in payment operations need to do is repair payments that didn't go through. Well, they have to go find the payment that didn't go through, and they're moving through their software. They have to then find the field, then they have to find the correction, and then enact the change. And if you can actually use AI to go ferret out for an operator and all the payments within their domain, here's the 10 payments that didn't go through, here's the field where there was an issue, here's a recommended fix, please review, and then trigger. That is materially more efficient than what happens today. And so that could save them a lot of time from doing something that is honestly something they prefer not to do. So anyway, that's where we're spending time both internally and within product around AI.
You described beautifully how you're using AI. You're not getting affected as much by AI to the downside. What do you think overall? I know this is like going off on a tangent a little bit, but stock prices in the software industry are massively depressed and they're continuing to take a hit. There's a lot of volatility. Some of that may be warranted, maybe some of it's not. How do you think this plays out with the software industry?
So a bit of what I described earlier, which is there's a spectrum of software companies. I feel like the equity markets, particularly the public equity markets, are treating most software businesses as if they're all the same. And there are some that are at the high risk end of the spectrum of the criteria that I described that will be materially disrupted. And those, right, it's appropriate that their valuations have deteriorated. There are others that sit at the other end of the spectrum where, interestingly, and we describe this about our business, is the foundation is very, very solid, and there's an opportunity to deliver more value that complements our software on top. And so we think that the businesses that fall in those categories or in that end of the spectrum should ultimately trade at very premium multiples. But it's going to take a little while, right? For particularly the public equity markets, I think private investors who are really, really close to these categories already understand this differentiation. But I think the public markets, you have all forms of investors, both retail and institutional. And even the institutional, some of them are investing across sectors. And so it's hard for them to differentiate. And so therefore you see consistent pressure downward. But I expect over the next 12 to 36 months, you're going to see many businesses deliver very strong results. And those will be in the low risk, high opportunity end of the spectrum, or some that will really suffer. And you'll start to see real differentiation in terms of the valuations versus what's happened today, which is the whole category has been pushed down.
You mentioned early on about coming into Finastra and trying to take a closer look at all the products in your portfolio and then maybe choosing which ones they won't be the focus area going forward. Are you through that exercise? Like, how difficult was it to determine where you focus or where you maybe reposition or even sell or do something else with other products?
We had a very, very busy first 3 to 4 months. I thank the team constantly because we were asking everybody to do their jobs, but also reassess kind of the direction of the company at the same time. And so I learned this a lot when I was at McKinsey. You have to have some hypothesis on the answer, but ultimately the way you arrive at the best answer is by talking to your customers, engaging your team. Most often the answer kind of sits with your customers and your team. and then looking at the markets that you operate in and seeing what the conditions are of those markets, right? When I say the conditions of the market, are they large and growing segments? How competitively intense are those markets? And so you can use what your team believes are the greatest opportunities or risks, right? What your customers are telling you they want from you and these market conditions. You put it together and you can arrive at a great strategy, which is what we did, right? So we arrived at a strategy and that included narrowing of the portfolio. We're not fully through that, right? We still have some refinements to make, but ultimately we have gotten narrower to date. We've sold our treasury and capital markets business, and we sold a student lending business in Canada, which I mentioned was a BPO. So we want to be the leading provider of mission critical software to financial institutions. And it was an amazing proposition of what we offered in Canada. We were providing a fully outsourced service to the federal and provincial governments, managing the entire student lending process in Canada. That's a pretty great business and operation. It's not a software business. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we said, well, that doesn't fit within the umbrella of what we want to do, even though it's a great business. We had a phenomenal team. The natural buyer of it was somebody who was doing something similar, but in the US. So it actually found a more natural home. And so we aren't fully done with the exercise, but we do know where our priorities are. And we're actually executing with a level of clarity about what we're trying to deliver and a pace that I think is a little bit accelerated. And so we're very happy with the progress in the first year and a half.
Switching gears a little bit, we like to learn about the person themselves. In this case, we know that you spent some time at McKinsey and you went to business school, but where are you from originally? And where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. So a small town in the smallest state in the United States. My dad was an entrepreneur. He was a designer and builder of sailboats. And so he sold, I would say, luxury boats, 40 to 50 feet, to successful professionals. And so think of them in the auto industry, it would be something like a Mercedes or a BMW. So really fine finish, but high performing. And so I learned a lot from him. And one of the greatest gifts that he gave me was the opportunity to interact with a really wide array of people, everything from lawyers to doctors to actors to business executives at a pretty early age, which was an incredible gift.
Was he selling boats to McKinsey consultants?
I don't think any one of them was a McKinsey consultant. I was trying to think of who was the most prominent. Actually, one of the most prominent was Christopher Reeve. So he was an actor.
Yeah.
Actually, the first time I got to fly on a private plane, I don't do it very often, but was Christopher Reeve's private plane after he went on a race with him, which was pretty amazing, flying with Superman.
He actually grew up down the street from where I sit right now. And I'm in Princeton, New Jersey. And so my kids go to the school that he went to as well. And you choose to go to University of Vermont. Why'd you decide to go to that school?
Yeah, so we haven't met in person. I'm a pretty tall guy, so I'm about 6'6". I love sports. I played every form of sports in high school, and I aspired to play basketball in college. My dad, I said, was an entrepreneur, and unfortunately, some part of that didn't work out. Just before I went to college, the U.S. federal government passed a luxury tax on all luxury goods that cratered the industry. And so everybody was wiped out in the industry for some period of time. So I needed a scholarship. And the coach at University of Vermont said, you can walk on your freshman year, only have a scholarship for your last 3. And that was better than the offers I got from other places where, I was going to take out a bunch of loans. The only problem was I got there and I showed up the first day and there was 5 other people he told the same thing to. And there was one spot. So I had gone there to play basketball and it was a very good education. I ended up going there and getting a great education and working the entire time I was there.
Last 2 questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
You heard me mention my father. Mm-hmm. Without question, he's the person that has had the greatest influence on me. Right? So he was a very, very caring leader who was entrepreneurial, a voracious learner. It was funny. I had one of his clients tell me he's just not a very good salesman. And his part is just curiosity because it was interesting because he ended up later in his career selling yachts that he wasn't building. And it's like, imagine going to a car dealership and the guy who was the architect and the mechanic was taking you through all your options, describe them in such extraordinary detail. Like, what am I going to do? But so anyway, my dad's personal style, energy, love for business and having fun, and the way that he built and led teams, I just learned a ton from my dad.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so I am broadly passionate about helping young people advance in their career. And one of the nonprofits that I was involved in for an extensive period of time, about 7 years, I was on the board of the Atlanta chapter of Year Up, which is an amazing organization. They take kids out of underprivileged communities. They typically have not gone off to college, and the track that they are likely on would be more of a retail, non-professional environment. And they give them a 6-month training program, which is a portion of technical skills, but a lot about how do you operate in a professional environment? How do you dress? How do you communicate? These kinds of things, and just basic expectations around behavior. And then they actually secure internships for them. And so companies that I've been at have, in multiple stops, have had these year up interns. And these are often some of the most amazing kids you met. The way you get lured into this is you hear the stories about the incredible outcomes, both where people started and then what they've done. And it is mind blowing, right? And it's great. My best story related to this was I had one of these interns, and I would always talk to the interns as they'd come in before they'd start at my company, and had one meeting with an intern. And I spoke to my EA after, and I said, I think you got this wrong. That must have been a new grad from business school. This kid was so unbelievably clear and effective in his communication, thoughtful, well-researched. It was amazing. And so that specific organization, I have very high regard for. But just generally, I do spend time with a lot of young people trying to help them advance in their career and achieve the things that they aspire to.
Wonderful. And we'll include a link to Year Up when we post this. Chris, want to thank you again for taking the time. It's been a great conversation.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.